Who are you?
You're about to find out.
What are you doing?
We were only playing the game of faces.
The girl is not ready.
Clearly not.
I am ready.
Ready, are you? What knows ready? For 800 years have I trained Jedi. I don't count to where I keep on who is to be trained.
Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Game of Thrones Season 5, Episode 3, High Sparrow. As always, this is a review free of book spoilers or any other spoilers from future episodes. So we begin our episode in Braavos, where we see Arya getting pissed off at having to sweep the floors. Just a point here, in this scene Arya says to Jaqen, you said I could be your apprentice, you said you'd teach me how to be a faceless man. When in actual fact he said no such thing to her, he just implied he would teach her how to kill people. But whatever. Anyway, Jaqen tells her to become a faceless man she must first become no one. So in an interview earlier on, the producers of the show said that there will be 3 weddings this season, and the next scene we get the first of these weddings when Margaery marries Tommen. So after that, we see Tommen and Margaery right after they consummated their marriage. So Margaery finally consummates her marriage, as this is the 3rd time she's married, but the first in which we actually when she actually consummated it. And Tommen says he just wanted to have sex all day long, which is kind of like a normal response for a 13-year-old boy faced with marrying someone as hot as Margaery. Margaery, on her part, is of course wooing Tommen in order to gain control of him, using her femininity to win him over, like her grandmother suggested she do in the previous season. Because indeed, Margaery gently suggests to Tommen that his mother might be happier if she lived elsewhere, which is a follow-up to what she said in episode 1 this season, where her brother suggests that they have to put up with Cersei living in King's Landing, and she said perhaps. So now we know what she meant by that she's going to try to convince Tommen to send her away. So in the next scene, Tommen and Cersei are having a nice little stroll when Tommen brings up the suggestion that Cersei might be happier living in Castle Rock. She, of course, sees right through this and knows it's Margaery trying to send her away. We know from last season's finale that Cersei would rather die than leave King's Landing, or Tommen's side. Plus, we know from last week's episode that she's starting to solidify her hold on the Iron Throne, so no way is she going to leave King's Landing. But she knows that this is Margaery's doing, so she goes to confront her. And this next scene is awesome. My favorite scene of the season so far, and probably one of my favorite of the entire series. This scene is so good. It's just covered and drenched in subtext. The entire scene is subtext. It was just so awesome. We know that Margaery is never straightforward, and she always wears a facade of being all demure and kind, when really she just uses this behavior as weapons to get what she wants. And in this scene, Cersei attempts to do the same thing, so they dance around like a lovely mother and daughter-in-law, when in actuality they both knew what they were really saying. So this scene begins with Margaery bragging to her friends about how many times Tommen has had sex with her, and when Cersei comes in and interrupts them, the first passive-aggressive insult Margaery throws at her is when she offers Cersei some food or drink, but makes a point of saying that they don't have any wine because it's too early in the day for them, which is an obvious jab at Cersei, how she constantly drinks. In fact, when Margaery said that, I was like, oh snap. Next, Margaery mentions how exhausted she is, implying that her and Tommen are constantly having sex, which is another way of saying, I'm banging your son. And then she follows this up with mentioning of the possibility of them having a child, which is another way of basically saying that soon she will be the one running things in King's Landing and not her. And finally, Marjorie finishes off by asking what the proper way to address Cersei is. If it's Queen Mother, which refers to that she's the mother of the king, or Dowager Queen, that indicates she was the wife of the deceased king. Basically reminding Cersei that Marjorie is now queen and Cersei is just secondary. So on the surface it seems like Marjorie was being sweet and courteous, but in actuality she was being brutal, absolutely brutal. And Cersei knew exactly what she was saying, and Marjorie knew that she knew. Cersei's response was to tell Marjorie that that if she needed anything at all, to come to her, which was basically Cersei's way of saying, "Bitch, I'm not going anywhere and you best watch yourself." But Cersei was obviously doing a bad job at hiding how upset she was, even though she tried, where Marjorie was the master. In fact, Lena Headey's performance in this scene was amazing, simply amazing, the way she performed Cersei trying to hide her discomfort and failing. And then when she leaves the room, she just storms off and she's really pissed. You can tell that she's just super fucking pissed. And that whole thing was awesome. So the next scene, we finally see Winterfell again, where the Boltons have taken up residence, and since this is the first time we see Ramsay Bolton this season, they have to remind us just how twisted he is by showing us a couple of flayed bodies of people he flayed alive because they refused to recognize the Boltons as the Wardens of the North. And we also get the shot of a crow snacking on one of the dead bodies, which is a nod to the novel A Feast for Crows, the book in which this season is partly based on, as the title of the book refers to the massive amounts of dead people who died in the last war. So anyway, Roose schools Ramsay on how to be a lord and doesn't necessarily tell him off for killing those people, but informs him of how precarious their situation is at the moment, and the way to secure their position isn't through violence but marriage, as Roose has arranged for a wife for Ramsay to marry. So next we see Littlefinger and Sansa arrive at Moat Cailin, where Littlefinger informs her she is going to Winterfell to marry Ramsay Bolton. So this most likely is going to be the second out of the 3 marriages the producers mentioned, so we're probably going to get a third one sometime later in the season. Anyway, Sansa at first refuses, then Littlefinger suggests it's time for her to stop being a victim and to start playing, and then suggests that she avenge her family. I'm not sure how he's connecting marrying the son of the man who killed her brother and helped kill her mother with getting revenge on them, but I suppose it's all part of the plan, and maybe, she figured this as well, which is why she agreed to it. So next we get a scene with Brienne and Podrick where we get some backstories. We get the story on how Podrick came to be in Tyrion's service and how Brienne came to be in Renly's service. I do believe that when Podrick tells Brienne he's proud to be in her service because she's such a great fighter, I think that really got to her. I think that really, that really touched her. But of course she tried to hide it. Anyway, the scene serves several purposes. One is to show Brienne and Podrick bonding, which frankly is cool to see as I was sick of them bickering. And 2, to remind us of the hatred Brienne has for Stannis because he killed Renly, which I can't help but think it might be some heavy foreshadowing going on since she's headed north and we know that's where Stannis is, so I guess we'll just have to see. So next we go to the Wall, where we see Jon Snow turn down Stannis' offer like we knew he would, and see him act as the Lord Commander. Stannis and Davos try to talk Jon Snow into coming with them to Winterfell to take the castle from the Boltons, but he refuses. I love scenes with Jon and Stannis. They never failed to delight me, and especially getting to see Davos have a one-on-one with Jon was great. So next we go to Braavos to see Arya getting knocked around by someone who's apparently playing the game of faces. So what's going on here is that Jaqen said before, to become a faceless man, one must become no one. And at the moment, Arya is still drenched in her Arya identity. So every time Arya said she was no one, the girl hit her because she could tell she was lying, as she was still behaving like Arya Stark. So Jaqen comes in and, puts this, points this out to her, and that she still has all the possessions of Arya Stark. So she then goes out to dump out all her things in the water to cast off her old life. But when it comes time to dump Needle, she can't do it, and she hides it behind some rocks instead. It's a sad scene. I mean, that sword means so much to her, pretty much means everything to her. So I'm glad she didn't do it. I would have been upset. Anyway, she dumps the coin Jaqen gave her as well, which seems a bit odd to me because last time she dumped it, Jaqen somehow magically retrieved it and gave it back to her, so it seems to me that he wants her to have it, but whatever. So next scene, Sansa arrives in Winterfell from Moat Cailin. That should take a couple of weeks, but she does it in one episode, but whatever. Anyway, Sansa arrives, and they have a formal introduction where Sansa pretends she doesn't fucking hate the Boltons, and Ramsay pretends he's not a twisted fuck. What's interesting here is the shot of this girl here. If you don't remember her, she was Ramsay's girlfriend, Miranda, who appeared in the previous 2 seasons. Last season, she shot a girl with a bow and arrow and let the dogs chew her face off because she was a little jealous of her being around Ramsay. Imagine what she's wanting to do with the girl who's going to marry Ramsay. Nothing good, I wager. So I predict some trouble down the line. So next, we go back to the Wall where Jon Snow, as the new Lord Commander, is dishing out some jobs. The first jobs he names is a man needs to be in charge of building the shitters or the latrines, and obviously Alliser Thorne expects it's going to be him. That Jon Snow is going to try to humiliate him, but instead he names some other guy, and this guy seems to be really happy about it. His job must have been really bad, the one he had before. And so next he names Alliser Thorne First Ranger, while Janos Slynt seems happy for him. Alliser himself doesn't seem all that pleased. It's obviously he's not going to be happy with anything as long as Jon Snow is the Lord Commander. So next, Jon Snow commands that Janos Slynt go to one of the ruined castles and restore it, to which Janos outright refuses, even after Jon Snow warns him and makes it clear he'd be defying a direct order. He tells Jon to shove that order up his ass. So of course Jon Snow does the only thing to do. He chops his head off in front of everyone. So to me, this scene reminds me a bit of the scene we got at the end of the last episode where Daenerys ordered the beheading of a former slave on her council, although nobody hissed at Jon or threw stones at him here. What you have to remember is the election between him and Alliser was really close. It was basically a tie. So there are a lot of Alliser Thorne supporters still out there, and Janos Slynt was Alliser's closest ally. So executing him, even after he begged for mercy and promised to obey, may not have been the best move for Jon Snow politically speaking, and may come back to bite him in the ass sometime in the future. But on a personal note, God, that scene was awesome. It was so great to see that Weasel finally get what's coming to him. Thank God I don't have to put up with him anymore. So in the next scene, we see the High Septon at a brothel choosing prostitutes that are posing as the 7 different gods, when a group of sparrows, a group of religious fanatics we were introduced to in the first episode of this season, to which Cersei's cousin Lancel had joined, interrupts them and doesn't take too kindly to their spiritual leader visiting a brothel, so they rough him up a little bit and force him to walk through the streets naked while people yell shit at him. He doesn't take too kindly to this. He goes to the small council and demands justice. I like how when he was at the small council, he addresses everyone by name, but when he gets to Qyburn, he doesn't know, and Qyburn just says, it doesn't matter. That cracks me up every time. Anyway, when the High Septon asks Cersei to kill the leader of the Sparrows, called the High Sparrow, Cersei asks where she might find him. So next we see Cersei going to the dingy-looking soup kitchen type thingy with a lot of poor people hanging around and looking for the High Sparrow. We meet him, and he's just as dingy and dirty and poor looking himself, who ultimately seems to be a champion of the poor and the powerless. Cersei informs him that she has arrested the High Septon, and although she doesn't outright say it, she seems to imply that the High Sparrow will become the new High Septon. Why Cersei is doing this hasn't been revealed yet, but considering her scenes earlier with Margaery, I'd say it's a good bet. It's a part of a wider plot to make her next move against Margaery. It is totally out of character for Cersei to cater to someone like him. So then Cersei goes to Qyburn and asks him to send a raven to request Littlefinger's return to King's Landing. No doubt this is also part of her schemes as well. Next we see Littlefinger chatting away with Ramsay, who he admits he knows very little about. And you know, this scene, what this scene says to me, it says Littlefinger has no fucking clue what he's getting Sansa into, which means Sansa has no idea what she's getting herself into. You know, it's funny that Sansa was originally meant to marry Joffrey, the most twisted, cruel fuck alive, and now she's going to marry the man who's been equated to Joffrey for how cruel and twisted he is. But the difference here is that Ramsay is much smarter than Joffrey ever was, as he's totally pretending to be a gentle and kindly lord and hiding what a monster he really is. So finally, we get to Volantis, where Tyrion is going stir crazy, finally convinces Varys to let him go for a stroll. If you recall, Volantis was referenced earlier in the show. Volantis was the city where Robb Stark's wife Talisa was from. She said she left the city because she was against slavery, which is why she moved to Westeros, where slavery is banned. Anyway, there in the streets, they see a priestess who follows the Lord of Light, preaching to the streets about Queen Daenerys and how she is the savior. If you recall, Melisandre, who also follows the same religion, believes that Stannis is their historical savior, Azor Ahai, reborn. This priestess seems to have a different idea on who Azor Ahai reborn is, and then she gives Tyrion a really creepy look. Given what we know about Melisandre's powers, it's not too far-fetched to assume this woman knew exactly who Tyrion was and where he was heading. So Tyrion and Varys go into a brothel where Tyrion hits on a prostitute, but when it comes time to do the deed, he backs out, probably too affected by his relationship with Shae to go back to whoring, which is something he did quite commonly in the past. So instead he goes out for a leak until a man sneaks up behind him who he thinks is Varys, but in fact is none other than Jorah Mormont. So Jorah ties up Tyrion and tells him he's taking him to the Queen. Now Tyrion, I'm sure, thinks he's talking about Cersei because Cersei is a queen that has a price on his head. But my guess would be he's talking about Daenerys, since it's Jorah Mormont we're talking about here, and Daenerys is the one and only person he'd ever really refer to as the Queen. And so ends High Sparrow, which I was thoroughly impressed with, so my rating for High Sparrow is a 9 excellent. This episode may be just another setup episode, but it was a damn good setup episode. We got some amazing scenes in this episode, from the awesome Cersei and Margaery confrontation, to Jon Snow chopping off Janos Slynn's head, to Arya beginning her Jedi training, to the setup with Sansa marrying Ramsay, to the setup with Jorah kidnapping Tyrion. All great stuff. I was tempted to give this episode a 10, but it is ultimately a setup episode and a tad slow at times, but definitely the best of the season thus far. So that's it for my review of High Sparrow. If you have read the books, you might want to check out my discussion with Atkin Tomko I'm having this week on my channel, where we'll get into all sorts of book spoilers, and personally I have a lot to say about it in that regard. Otherwise, check out my channel here next week for another spoiler-free review, and make sure you subscribe to keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.